But he asked me, why do you like movies? Because I studied film. That was my background is acting and film theory. And I said, because it's part of my DNA. I grew up watching movies. But I've thought about it today before our interview, Victoria, and I get to enter other stories. That's why I love movies. And it's the same with books.
Welcome to Modern Publishing. I'm Victoria, author, editor, and the owner of Blue Pen, and today I'm on with Anthea T. Piscarik. Anthea has established a professional writing career as both a creative writer and a news reporter. She also holds degrees in theater and is currently marketing 5 screenplays. She's published the first 2 books of her historical fiction series, The Miriam Chronicles, and Anthea happens to be a client of Blue Pen as well. We helped her with the editing and design for the second book in that series, The Years in Between.
From my novel. So that was the other, the editing process is writing is rewriting. We all know that. But I never expected to cut 100 pages. So that was a great thing. I've learned so much. Everything I do, I learn from in this creative world of writing. I don't care what type of writing it is. We always learn from it. And I'll never stop learning. And that's the scary part, because it's like, how much capacity do I have to learn to be better at this? It's like, but we just, day at a time, a story at a time.
That's always my perspective is, if your writing is getting better, if each book that you write you feel is better than the last, then you're doing your job, because there is no such thing as a perfect story. No. It just doesn't exist.
No. And I am so grateful, because the first book, Unearthing Christmas, I had someone call me and tell me how much they loved it. And it text me, and I thought, okay, I didn't waste my time or anyone else's time. But then, I thought that was as good as it gets. And then the second book, I had a few people say, I really liked your first book, but I thought your second book was better. And I'm like, thank you. It's music to my ears. So now I have the third book, which will create a new challenge. The second book, if I may talk a little bit about it, goes back in time. Historical, goes back 50 years. Like, it starts in 1956 and goes to like 2019, pre-pandemic. So historical. Oh my goodness. You can Google, you can research the weather in London on February 16th, 1966, and write a little description of what that weather is like. The third book is 50 years in the future. So it's speculative, but it's not far enough away to create a totally fantastical world. It's not like 1,000 years in the future. There's enough time. I mean, it's within a time where we should be able to know what the world will look like, but maybe not. It's like, it's going to be my biggest challenge, because the next 2 books go back in time again. So this third book is going to be, it's getting to, I'm doing a lot of the writing of the characters. The characters are coming to life, but the world they live in, I need to do research and start talking to people who are savvy with technology, are savvy with the auto industry. I mean, I spoke to my driver from California. He said, cars will be flying in 30 years. It's like, okay. So yeah, I need to do a lot of different kinds of research for this book. And but it all starts with the characters. I mean, the characters aren't going to change that much. It's just the world they live in. So yeah, stay tuned.
That is so important. I'm such a proponent of character-driven stories, which, I mean, I think at this point, I don't think it's really a debate. I'd say everyone is, but especially when you're looking at your plot and structure, character first plots are always the strongest.
The characters inform the plot, and you have to know your characters. My character, she was knocking on my door to write. I keep putting this up here. I love this cover, by the way. This is thanks to Blue Pen.
Oh, I love that.
Yes, it just draws me in. But I knew this character. I mean, she was in my first novel, and she's like, "Hey, Anthea," knocking on my door or whatever, tapping me on the shoulder, saying, "I have a story to tell you." And I once said that to a nurse practitioner. She's like, "Your characters tell you their stories? Isn't that sort of like schizophrenia?" Not that I am in any way disparaging anyone with any kind of, whatever. I thought, wow, did she really think that this character is really, really talking to me? It's like, there's a world of imagination that we all have. And, anything I do story-wise feeds my imagination, but sometimes a character has to feed my imagination and to tell me their story. So I knew her story. I knew if she wasn't a photojournalist, I knew what her second career would be. She would have been a fashion designer. You just have to know your characters, and then they will tell you their story. Because they become a part of you until their story is told. And there are always surprises too. I mean, you don't just sit down and like this robot that's, being dictated to. There are always surprises and twists in that story. When I start a book, I already know in my head how it's going to end, but the trajectory, the roadmap, the treasure map to get there can change. It can have lots of different detours and dead ends and turnarounds and whatever. But that's part of the discovery. It's all a discovery to me. It just is. Now with this book I'm writing, the character hasn't completely informed me of who she is. She better not keep any secrets from me because she needs to tell me. But she's starting to flesh out. And part of that was being away from home. You get out of Dodge for a while and just let a whole different environment, LA, which is, Hollywood, which is, it's funny because Hollywood Boulevard is teeming with people. And I find that I can empty my head out when I'm around a lot of people sometimes and just empty my mind. And it worked. So I came back from there. I was only there for 4 days with some new ideas. And we'll see how that works because the character is really fleshed out now. And she'll continue to be fleshed out because she'll keep informing me. So, but I have to say one other thing. When I was out there, I was meeting with a producer who is a friend. And, we're hoping to do something with Unearthing Christmas. We'll see what happens. I don't want to say too much. I mean, it did start as a screenplay. But he asked me, why do you like movies? Because I studied film. That was my background is acting and film theory. And I said, because it's part of my DNA. I grew up watching movies. But I've thought about it today before our interview, Victoria, and I get to enter other stories. That's why I love movies. And it's the same with books. And it's the same with writing. I enter another story. So the only scary part is when you're writing, you're entering a story that you created. So, okay,
which can be, it can be the most amazing thing and the most terrifying thing.
It is
all at once.
Yes, writers' conferences, the best-selling writers, the New York Times, whatever. And the theme last year, I was at a writers' conference in New York City, and it said "Write Scared." And I have to add to that, "Write scared until you have no fear." That would be the rest of it for me. It's like you can write scared, but you got to get to the point where, I think I've arrived somewhere. I don't want to stay in the scared mode, but I totally get it. Totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you're writing and pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone, with writing, with life, with anything, if you stay in your comfort zone, you're not gonna improve. You're gonna maintain.
Right. That's right. Yeah. I like I said, I would rather. I have these 5 novels under the Wyrm Chronicles, and the 4th novel, I know this character so well. It's like, oh my gosh, she breathes. I breathe. But the character that is the main character of my 3rd novel, I can't go to my next novel until I write this one, because there are some people, authors, who can write 2 novels, 3 novels at once. I'm not that person. I tried it. I have bits and pieces of the other 2 novels written, but I had to put them away. I had to put them aside. And now I have to concentrate and focus on this 3rd novel until strap myself in for the ride and get this done. Even though the other 2 were like tapping on my shoulder with the characters that I know so well. So, yeah.
I am the same way too, mostly. I will say when I start getting near the finish line with, especially with drafting, more story ideas will start, like you say, kind of tapping on my shoulder, like, hey, it's time to start doing some brainstorming and some outlining and get ready for the next one.
Right. And for me, being the quintessential procrastinator at times, I started realizing that I was using these other books to stop writing the book I needed to be writing. It was almost a way of procrastinating in a very creative way, but it was pushing my deadline to get the 3rd novel done. And that's when I had to say, you know what? I love you characters, but you have to wait. It's not your turn yet. It's like, I'm sorry. Don't go away. Don't disappear from me, It's like, just wait in the wings for a while.
Have a little line of characters waiting for their turn to make an appearance.
Right. It's a crazy world. It's like, it's funny how I always seem to have these dueling protagonists, and I'm still discovering what it's like to be a twin. It's like, some people think that you're like this one really nasty person who one day says hello and the other day just breezes by you. It even happened in Hollywood. My twin sister was at a film festival, the Turner Classic Movie Film Festival. And here I am on a busy Hollywood boulevard. And a guy comes up to me and said, I just opened a door for you. And I said, oh no, that was my twin sister. And he looked at me, he thought, you're kidding. He thought I was just trying to blow him off. I mean, it was like, this is even in Hollywood where you'd think I'd be able to disappear, But yeah, I always have I have these characters that somehow they complement each other and that happen in Unearthing Christmas, but I don't have that in the 3rd book. It's just one central character and she's on her own. So I don't have that duality going on. So we'll see how she does in this when she's all by herself. I mean, she obviously has a world and other people, but I can't develop her through how she works with another person. So
that is so challenging, especially when you're looking at the first chapter, the opening scene. To have a character introduced without conversation, without another character to play off of, that is probably one of the most challenging things to write.
Absolutely, right. Now, the other challenge with me is these are standalone books, but they're also part of a series. So I have to kind of introduce these characters of where they were before, because I've seen books that are considered standalones where I've been completely lost. I mean, these are bestsellers. And I thought, where did this character come from? And I don't know how important they are to this story. So that's another, all these challenges I keep bringing up. This is almost like cathartic. I'll have to work out all these challenges. But yeah, I don't want to get too far into the backstory with the current book, but I do know that it did help with years in between, although people who had read it and had read the first book said, it was a little slow in the beginning because I knew all that stuff. But once I got to this point, the pages flew by and I thought, wow, well, I don't know if there's a sacrifice that you make when you do a series in that respect. There has to be a link to some degree, even if it is a standalone, because I do want them to be standalones as well. And that's tough because it says book 2. The second book says the Wyrm Chronicles book 2, but to allow, to convince people that it's also a standalone isn't always easy when you don't get a chance to tell them that. They just look at Amazon page and they see, oh, book 2. Well, where's book 1? So, but it's word of mouth. It really is. I've the reviews are coming in. I've had people say it's a page turner. I am one of these people who believe in that. I don't want, paint drying on the page. I don't like that feel. It's like, and that might come from my script writing a little bit, because you have to keep things moving. It probably does inform my way of writing a novel. But some people, that's what they like, is a page turner. And that seems to be the type of writer I am. I want to entertain as well as create an emotional tie. Both are important to me. Yeah.
And I would argue that that's important in every genre.
Mm.
Even in the most literary of fiction, people still want a good story. It's readers are literal first and story first. And then they get into the weeds with, symbolism and the other things that make literature interesting.
Right. Exactly. And voice. I just started, I don't even remember if I read To Kill a Mockingbird before. But I decided, after reading a lot or listening to some very current bestsellers and realizing that they didn't all work in the audio format for me. Some of them did better than others. So I said, I need to go read a classic. So I brought that with me to California, and Harper Lee's voice just was so evident to me. It's like, oh my goodness, this is a storyteller. Obviously who doesn't know that? But I heard her voice. You don't want to be like, my voice, as a writer, but Scout just was filtered through Harper Lee to a point where it wasn't obvious, but she was that person behind the screen or behind the curtain. And I thought, wow, this is beautiful. To have the author's voice, it's almost like I'm learning the character, but I'm learning about the author too, in a not an overt way. And I just want to have a voice that people recognize in my writing. It's like, I don't know how important that is anymore. I don't hear a lot about voice as much as I used to. I hear all about like spectacular writing and people who can write adjectives and verbs that you never even thought could be a verb. It's like, I won't point to anyone, but I never thought you could use that as a verb. But it's like, yeah, gymnastics. I just want a good voice and a good story and a character. I had a friend of mine said, I was crying by chapter 2 of your book, The Years in Between. Well, first she said, I was crying by chapter 2, and I thought it was the book club book. And I thought, oh, yeah, it is kind of sad. She goes, no, I'm talking about your book, because I had made the leap of thinking it was another book. And she had to put it down because she said, it was too, her story is too sad. And I'm like, oh, but it's not sad. It's like, there's everything that happens for a reason, and there's some good reason behind it. And it prevented something else from happening that could have been maybe worse. But okay, I thought, all right, the good part of this is she was so emotionally attached to that character that she didn't want to feel her pain anymore. I thought, all right.
A listing an emotional response like that in a reader is definitely, I think, something to strive for.
Yes, it is. I don't mind crying at a book. I read a book that took place in Afghanistan, and 1,000 Splendid Suns, and I was crying at the end of that book, and I was every page I just wanted something good to happen to these characters, even though I knew something wouldn't. But I was such a part of their story. And I just want people to be a part of the story. Like I said, that's why I watch movies, because I enter into that world, that story. And it's the same with a book. And there's no better feeling. It's beyond just being in an imaginative way. It's entering that story that's not my own story. Sometimes I just don't want to be in my own story of like what happens in life. And yeah. So as long as I have stories to tell, I will still, the writers, and Victoria, you probably, writers, I used to say, I'm miserable when I'm not writing. I'm miserable when I'm writing, but I'm even more miserable when I'm not writing. At least I've gotten beyond that. I'm at the point where I'm a happy person when I'm not writing, but I'm a happier person when I'm writing. It's like, I'm kind of like switching instead of the miserable word. It's like, I don't want to consider myself miserable. I don't be like, open a vein and bleed on the page type. I'm just all about like, okay, let's see if this character has more to say. Let me hear what she has to say. Let me hear what he has to say. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that is such, and kind of tying it back with the voice discussion before, voice is such a hard thing because that term is tossed around just all the time because it is important, but it's also just extremely difficult to define.
Yes.
What are we talking about with voice? And then to make it more complicated, there's the author's voice. I would say that every author has a unique voice, even if it changes throughout their career. But then there's the character's voice, with the author stepping into that character's shoes and their head and writing as them, like we were discussing, especially with the expectation in today's world that it's going to be a close point of view.
Yes.
So, yeah. And then a lot of writers as well worry about that voice and having it changed with editing and even publishing, if the publisher is going to require changes that decimate that voice or reduce it. They're just, yeah. So that was just kind of a lot. There are a lot of topics around voice. So anything you want to kind of jump in with?
Yes, I agree with you with the editing, because I had an editor that had a completely different voice than I did. This is before I got to Blue Pen, and this was my other publisher, and I had to hire someone, and it was a development editor, and I made the mistake of not seeing any of her work beforehand. She was recommended to me, and I don't even know if it would have helped if I had seen, because I would have probably, being someone who like thinks the best of everything, it all work out, that okay, their voice might not be the voice because she was working with a different author. I mean, even that can't even be your criteria for hiring someone, because they were working with another author, so you don't know what the voice is, but you only know what your voice is, hopefully. I'm not sure what my voice is, but I know what it isn't. And the voice was totally different. And I had to, I'll be honest, I had to, like, 98% of her rewrites I had to not use. And it's not that I was being like a prima donna. It just, a journalist background, and I've been a news reporter, and I could see it was this news reporter. I recognized the news reporter. I totally recognized it. And I'm so grateful I've been there. I know what that, when we first started interviewing with this podcast, I know what that type of writing is. And it wasn't working for the story. And a whole chapter was taken out, which was crucial to the plot point. Just took out a whole chapter, because the character she didn't think was important. So, I mean, I got through it all. And I learned that the voice is something that is very important to the story. And I don't know, I've recognized it. I used to I was working as a reader in college, where I had to read other people's story, like, and grade them, or like peer counseling and tutoring. And I could see what writers had a voice. I could hear it's almost like you hear the voice. And it's interesting, I studied Spanish in college, and I had, as an English major, theater minor, I had to like really know another language. It's like you didn't have to know just English, you had to really know another language. And I got to the point where I had to do writing in Spanish. And the professor said, and I never thought I was really very conversant in it or really had a full knowledge of it, but she said, Anthea, I hear your voice in Spanish. And I get chills even now. Like, she heard my voice as a writer. She said, you could write stories in Spanish. This was years ago. And I thought, something is coming through. And like you said, Victoria, it's so hard to pinpoint, but you totally know when it's not there. It's like, yeah, I you need to protect your voice when you hire someone. It's really important. And with Blue Pen, I've used your proofreading services, and I was so grateful that it didn't change. I mean, the story was at the point where, it had evolved enough, but this is my advice. If you're at the point where you're counting your pennies or your dollars or whatever, you better get a proofreader, because that's the most important thing. That could be the most embarrassing thing as a writer. You need to have someone who knows what is going to work and can find those things that aren't not working in, like, spelling, grammar, whatever. You will not see all of that. You might have this, oh, wow, I got my voice. It's all there. But if it's not proofread, you're going to have a mess on your hands. It's like you're going to have something, you're going to try to, rewind the tape in life. So, if you're looking for one or the other, find your voice, but make sure you have a proofreader who brings out the best of it so that you're not off key.
I will give the caveat that that's definitely the most important for indie authors. If you're going the traditional route, then you'll probably want to focus more on developmental editing,
yes.
Because there will be additional rounds of editing later.
That's right.
And, unless your manuscript is an absolute and total mess, an agent or a publisher probably isn't too concerned if, there are a couple of punctuation issues here and there. Right. But if the plot and the characterization has problems, then they're not gonna mess with it.
That's correct. Yes. You definitely need to have all that. I mean, that's the writer in you. You need to know your story. You need to have told the best story you can tell. And a development editor can definitely help in that respect. Yes. And it's very different from script writing. As a writer, the notes, it's all about the notes. But
thanks to our viewers for hanging out with us today. I hope this conversation inspired you to blaze your own trail in the publishing industry. The full episodes are available as podcasts. You can just search for Modern Publishing wherever you get your podcasts, or head over to bluepinbooks.com/modernpublishing. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. And happy writing, as always. That's it for today. I'll see y'all next time.